It started as a typical Thursday evening in downtown Minneapolis. I had just stepped out of a diner, coffee in hand, wearing jeans, a black windbreaker, and my baseball cap pulled low. I was off duty, technically, but years of training never let me fully relax. That's just part of the job. As I strolled toward my car, parked near a corner gas station, I noticed a commotion across the street. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off windows. A few officers were engaged in some kind of heated discussion with a teenager near a broken-down scooter. I paused briefly to observe, just long enough for things to get strange on my side of the street. Two officers, one young and nervous-looking, the other more seasoned but tense, crossed toward me. One of them touched his radio. The younger one kept his hand hovering near his sidearm. I instinctively straightened up, still calm. "You got ID on you?" the older one asked, eyes narrowing at me like I'd already done something wrong. I looked at them, puzzled. "Excuse me?" "Let's not make this harder," the younger one snapped. "Just need to verify who you are." I gave them a long look. "Under what grounds?" That's when it got worse. The older cop stepped forward, motioning toward my arm. "Sir, turn around. Hands where we can see them." I held up my free hand slowly, my other still gripping the coffee cup. "I suggest you take a second look before this turns into something it shouldn't." They didn't. And 10 seconds later, I was being pushed against the side of my car, my jacket yanked back, and cold cuffs clipped around my wrists. They never checked my ID. Not yet. My forehead rested against the cool metal of my car as I heard the older officer mutter something into his radio. The younger one stood behind me, a little too eager with the cuffs, clicking them tighter than necessary. "You're making a mistake," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice measured. "Reach into my right jacket pocket. Gently. There's a badge in there." The older officer paused, hand halfway to his belt. "A badge, huh?" he said with a skeptical laugh. "Everyone's got one these days." I didn't say anything else. I knew what would happen once he actually looked. He finally reached in, pulling out a slim leather case. He flipped it open, and froze. His partner leaned over to get a look, and suddenly the smug confidence on his face drained like someone had opened a valve. The silence was immediate. Then the older one stepped back, his mouth slightly open. "Special agent," he whispered. "Yep," I said. "FBI. Counterterrorism Division." There was a beat of awkward silence. The younger officer, clearly shaken, looked at me and stammered, why didn't you say something?" I turned around slowly, cuffs still on my wrists. "I did." The senior officer looked like he'd swallowed something sour. He reached out to unlock the cuffs, fumbling with the key. "We're sorry, Agent. We didn't realize, that's obvious," I interrupted. "But this isn't just about a misunderstanding. You didn't even run an ID check before throwing me in cuffs." The younger one stepped back, face red. I could see his hands trembling slightly now. The radio on his belt crackled with updates from the nearby scooter scene. But they weren't listening anymore. Because things were about to flip entirely. I wasn't just going to walk away. I flexed my wrists as the cuffs finally came off. The metal had left faint red marks, but I ignored them. "Do you know what the Bureau calls this?" I asked, still calm, but louder now. "Procedural overreach. And you've just committed it on a federal agent." The older officer raised his hand slightly, his voice low. "Look, Agent, we truly didn't, I'm not done." I stepped past him and reached into my jacket's inner pocket, pulling out my ID wallet this time, not just the badge, but my credentials. I held it open. The gold shield and laminated ID glinted under the streetlights. At that moment, a third officer approached, likely a supervisor responding to the earlier commotion. He walked up quickly, then slowed when he saw what I was holding. "Agent Harris," he said cautiously, reading my name from the ID. Sir. I wasn't informed we had bureau activity in the area. You weren't. I was off duty. I closed the wallet and slipped it away. That doesn't change what just happened. The supervisor looked at the two officers, who now seemed to be trying to disappear into the sidewalk. I'd like a supervisor's report filed, I continued. Names, badge numbers, body cam footage. And I'd like the footage secured before anything conveniently disappears. Of course, the supervisor nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I'll handle it personally. I turned back to the officers. Do either of you realize what could have happened if I hadn't stayed calm? If I wasn't trained to stay calm? Neither one spoke. You just put your careers on a knife's edge. Around us, a few bystanders had started filming. One woman across the street had her phone out, catching the tail end of the exchange. The same two officers who thought they were making a routine stop were now frozen under streetlight glare and digital witness. And this was just the beginning. The supervisor tried to smooth things over. Agent Harris, I understand the seriousness of this, but perhaps we can resolve it without, I cut him off. This isn't going to be buried under paperwork and internal handling. I'm calling my field office. I stepped back toward my car, retrieved my phone from the driver's seat, and dialed. The line clicked twice before a familiar voice answered. This is Special Agent Mendoza. Mendoza, it's Harris. I need you to flag a stop downtown. I was detained, improperly. Badge and ID were visible. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted from casual to sharp. Are you all right? Fine. But I'm standing here with two local officers who skipped every protocol and cuffed me before asking my name. Location? 5th and Fremont. Near the station. Got it. Stay there. She hung up without another word. The moment I put the phone down, the supervisor approached again, more carefully this time. Sir, we really don't want this to escalate. They didn't know. These things shouldn't happen, I replied. Not to civilians. Not to agents. Not to anyone. 10 minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled up. Mendoza stepped out, followed by two more agents in plain clothes. Her eyes swept the scene, then landed on the officers. I assume these are the two, she asked. I nodded. She walked over to the officers like a storm in a suit, controlled, quiet, but unmistakably dangerous. What part of verify first do you two not understand, she said coldly. You put your department on the hook. You put our agent in cuffs. You want to explain that to DC? Or should I? The younger officer looked pale. The older one glanced at his supervisor, but no help was coming. And Mendoza wasn't done. Agent Mendoza circled the two officers like a prosecutor mid-trial. You didn't check ID. You didn't request dispatch verification. You didn't even call it in before making physical contact. Tell me, what did you do right? Neither answered. The silence was crushing. This isn't just about Agent Harris, she continued, her voice clipped and precise. This is about your entire process. If you treated a federal agent like this, how are you treating people without a badge? The older officer opened his mouth, but Mendoza raised a hand. No excuses. Save it for your internal review board. I watched the supervisor shift uncomfortably as Mendoza pulled a small notepad from her pocket. Badge numbers. Full names. Now. They hesitated. That wasn't a request, she said. Or would you like this to become a formal obstruction matter? They complied, slowly. Mendoza took the notes, then looked at me. We'll file a full incident report. Washington will see it by morning. And your footage, she turned to the supervisor, had better still exist when we follow up. He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Body cam data is automatically backed up. I'll personally ensure it's preserved. Good, she said. We'll be in touch. With that, she turned back to me. Harris. You all right? I nodded. Physically, yeah. She looked at me for a beat, then said, quieter, this isn't going to be forgotten. I know. We shook hands. She motioned for the other agents, and they headed back to the SUV. The officers didn't move. They looked stunned, stripped of authority, stripped of their narrative. And for once, the system didn't look away. By the time Mendoza's SUV disappeared down the block, the street had quieted, but the tension hadn't. The two officers stood there, rigid and exposed. Their radios crackled softly with routine chatter, but none of them moved to respond. I turned to the supervisor one last time. I expect to receive the body cam footage and full report sent to the Bureau within 48 hours. That includes time-stamped logs and dispatch records. He nodded. Understood. I'll make sure it's done. Without another word, I got into my car. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, watching the flashing lights reflect off the windshield. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I knew what was coming. By morning, internal affairs would already be flagged by the Bureau. By noon, someone in the mayor's office would get a quiet call. And by next week, those two officers wouldn't be doing street patrol, if they were in uniform at all. This wasn't about payback. It was about accountability. The next day, Mendoza called me. Washington saw the report, she said. There's going to be an inquiry. They're requesting an internal audit of the department's street protocol, especially around detainment procedures. Good, I replied. We're also asking that both officers receive retraining under Bureau observation. I exhaled. That was something. Mendoza paused. You know, you could have escalated. Filed formal misconduct charges. Made it a media storm. I know, I said. But I didn't want headlines. I wanted change. She was silent for a moment, then said, You got their attention. I looked out the window at the city moving around me. This time, it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone they might have cuffed next. A week later, I got a message marked confidential from Mendoza. It wasn't an email, it was an encrypted Bureau file drop. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a transcript from the local precinct's internal meeting. It read like damage control disguised as discipline. The police chief opened the session with a dry statement about a regrettable incident involving improper field conduct. Then came the deflections, claims of confusion, high-pressure environment, unclear identification. But the Bureau's response had already cut through the noise. Agent Mendoza's written statement was attached to the record. It was direct, surgical, and left no room for misinterpretation. She outlined the breakdown of procedure minute by minute. Every ignored ID cue. Every skipped verification step. Every second I spent in handcuffs for no justifiable reason. There was also a brief but telling addendum. Agent Harris's restraint and professionalism likely prevented this from becoming a department-wide crisis. That is not praise. It's a warning. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't going away quietly. Later that evening, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Deputy Director Langston. Not a man who picked up the phone for just anything. Harris, he said, voice low and even, you've triggered something bigger than you realize. I waited. You didn't just expose two officers. You exposed a pattern. And now the Bureau wants a closer look, not just in Minneapolis. We're sending task forces to conduct quiet reviews in multiple cities. This won't be public. Not yet. But it will matter. I sat in silence for a moment. Then I replied, good. It's time. By the end of that month, word spread through federal channels faster than any press outlet could have imagined. What started as a single incident on a Minneapolis street had become a catalyst. The Bureau launched a discreet review initiative, officially titled Urban Field Compliance Oversight. Unofficially, agents called it the Echo Sweep. Teams were deployed to shadow local law enforcement across 5 major cities, including Detroit, Phoenix, and Atlanta. Quiet observers. Clipboards. Cameras. No press. No press conferences. Just consequences. Meanwhile, back in Minneapolis, the 2 officers involved in my stop had been reassigned, not fired, not suspended, but moved to administrative roles pending the outcome of ongoing internal assessment. The kind of language that sounded like delay. But then I got another update, one that felt different. An anonymous leak had made it to a mid-sized independent outlet. Somehow, someone got a copy of the body cam footage and uploaded it, unedited. No music. No voiceover. Just the raw moment of 2 officers slapping cuffs on a man who calmly said, "Check my jacket." The video went viral within hours. And then came the calls. One local council member demanded immediate reforms. A city commissioner tweeted, "If this is how they treat trained agents, what chance does the average citizen have?" Even the mayor's office issued a rare statement, calling for a full investigation into officer conduct and departmental field training standards. It was out now. Not because I wanted it to be, but because the truth doesn't stay quiet forever. By the following week, Minneapolis PD announced a formal internal shakeup. The 2 officers who had cuffed me. Suspended without pay, pending disciplinary hearings. The department also scheduled a mandatory retraining initiative for all field officers, led in part by Bureau liaisons. It wasn't just talk anymore. Things were moving. One morning, I was invited to attend a closed-door panel, city officials, police command, a few federal reps, and me. Mendoza sat 2 seats to my left. A police captain across the table opened with a polished apology, rehearsed and stiff. I listened in silence. Then they asked if I had anything to say. I stood. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said. "I didn't want headlines. I didn't want suspensions. I wanted to get into my car without being treated like a suspect for existing." The room was quiet. But what happened to me could have happened to someone else, and maybe that person doesn't carry a badge. I looked directly at the chief. You all have a responsibility that doesn't start with a weapon or a badge. It starts with judgment. With seeing people clearly before reacting. That didn't happen. No one interrupted. Reform isn't just about rules, it's about culture. And if your officers can't tell the difference between threat and citizen, that's not training. That's failure. The chief slowly nodded. The next day, the city council passed a measure requiring officers to complete quarterly verification drills with bureau observers. Civilian liaisons were added to patrol rotation reviews. Footage reviews were made mandatory, not optional. Something was actually changing. Not because I shouted. Because I didn't stay silent. 2 months later, I walked past that same gas station, same corner, same diner across the street. It looked like any other night in the city. But everything felt different now. I wasn't on edge. I wasn't glancing over my shoulder. Not because the city had magically transformed, but because something had shifted beneath the surface, like gears finally grinding into motion. Across the state, and in a few others, departments were adopting new interagency protocols. Officer training modules now opened with case studies, including mine. I never asked for my story to be part of the curriculum, but if it helped one officer hesitate before escalating, it was worth it. I received a private commendation from the Bureau, not for bravery, not for confrontation, but for restraint. Mendoza handed it to me in her usual no-nonsense way. "You didn't blow it up," she said. "You fixed it from the inside." I just nodded. I didn't need applause. Weeks later, I got one more call. This time, from the mayor's office. "We're putting together a public roundtable," the aide said. Community leaders, law enforcement, and oversight reps. We'd like you to open it. I paused. Why me? Because change doesn't feel real until the people who've lived it speak up. I agreed. Not because I wanted attention. But because I knew silence is what lets broken systems breathe. Now, they'd be forced to listen. Not just to my voice, but to every story like mine that never got a badge, a witness, or a second chance. This time, they'd see it coming.